I wanted to talk about, I think a lot of folks had a chance to kind of flip through the copies we have at the back table there, but I wanted to have a chance to talk about a transboundary initiative of our Watershed Council and working with partners in Saskatchewan, Montana. Diego, I can't thank enough SODCAP for supporting us and financially contributing this last time around with the latest version that we did. But yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Milk River Watershed Council's State of the Watershed Report. A little bit of how we kind of got here and why we're working transboundary, which fits obviously with the grasslands, wildlife, biodiversity, all the other issues that we've been talking about. And then of course the 2003 one. So I mentioned us a little bit yesterday. We're one of 11 of the watershed planning and advisory councils across province and all the major river basins. We're a not-for-profit. We try to do our best to provide a local voice for community concerns to be addressed through like sound science, planning, research, monitoring, stewardship. The provincial government, I have to give them a lot of credit. Since 2004, we've had what's called the Water for Life strategy in Alberta, and it's basically enabling legislation that supports us 11. It was established the framework to support the 11 watershed councils. It also supports the Alberta Water Council, which primarily focuses on water policy in the province and develops projects that help fill some gaps for different stakeholders and partners, as well as we don't always want to call it an umbrella, but we do. The Water for Life strategy also supports through the Land Stewardship Network and others local community groups, the small watershed stewardship groups, creek groups especially in those early 2000 days. Unless you're working with your neighbors, it was almost impossible to find stewardship funding to support your individual projects. And the pendulum has maybe swung a little bit to the other way right now, where some of the provincial or even some of the federal programs are more focused in on individual producers in Alberta. But still, those watershed stewardship groups, a lot of them are reinvigorating, especially in the southwest corner of the province, that haven't been really as active in the last few years. And Water for Life and the provincial government really does support that. One of the main things that we are tasked with under the Water for Life and our mandate and roles document as a WPAC is to develop what we call State of the Watershed reports, guiding documents that deal with a number of issues, which I'll get onto here a little bit, but that that help with management within our basins, but also provide maybe some goalposts in terms of what a better understanding of where we are with science. What are some of the gaps? What are the things that we need to work on towards? What are our needs for different stakeholders, whether it's municipalities or others, in terms of planning, and this really gives us the backbone to understand where we're moving in the future. Our watershed is, again, I mentioned the Alberta portion of it. I should just back up one. The Alberta portion of the watershed, as you can see, is a small piece of it, and we're connected at the head and the hip, what I like to say, with Montana, as well as that south of the Divide area, of course, in Saskatchewan is critically important. Oops, now I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, guys. Yeah, and this kind of gets put into perspective. God, I'm so far from my computer, I can't even read my numbers. 11% is in Alberta, about 1 million acres. Is that right? 1.6? That seems like those numbers. That's right. I'll believe the numbers. I'm not going to believe what I thought in my head. So, anyways, back to our approach. I kind of mentioned this a little bit. The State of the Watershed reports are kind of that help us lead to improving management of what I say, watershed resources, not just water resources. And the other stuff that we do, the fun things that you see on the back table there, are really help better inform our community. So I mentioned the State of the Watershed reports. It helps us develop that common understanding. It's a tool and it's a starting point. This is a photo from Lois Gilchrist. You heard a little bit yesterday about the Gilchrist family, one of the founding families in the basin. And way back in, so our Watershed Council has been around for 20 years now, and back in 2007, we started in a process to develop this first report. And we put together a team. Some of those folks are in the room here still from the original group. put together a team of Coalition of the Willing, basically, that had information and was able to support and say, okay, what everybody's working on these dust collecting reports out here. Nobody's really putting all those pieces together to kind of understand how things work on a landscape basis. And then we came up with our very first State of the Watershed report. And this one here, tell me anybody else who's done 1,800 copies of a report before. This was like you've seen in the back table, it's about a 110-page, what I call coffee table book. It really is like the Reader's Digest version of everything that's happened in our area up to this point. I don't think anybody has. And everybody's like, why the heck did you spend so much time and money and resources to print that many? And our community really picked this up. I think it was lightning in a bottle, that first one. It was like we did the new community history book, basically. But it was taking into consideration not just the community portions of it, but everything else in the watershed, our landscape, our biodiversity, water quality, water quantity, how things interact and work. And I had, at the time, in 2008, I wasn't with the Watershed Council yet, but I was doing ag extension through a program called Alberta Environmentally Sustainable Agriculture, and I was based in Cardston County on the western end of our watershed here. And I had people, after we had this project complete, I had ladies from Delbanita out west of here that came into the office, and they grabbed 10 copies of it, and they were giving it as Christmas gifts to all their grandkids, because they really seen this as, like I said, something that helped them better explain everything from geography to fish and wildlife and rangelands in the watershed. So really cool project. It was fantastic. Again, like I said, we identified so many gaps in 2008 that, for instance, water quality. There's been 100 years of discussions about dams on the river and what's going to happen with St. Mary's diversion and all the other water management aspects physically of the river, and we really had no data. Nobody knew what a baseline situation looked like in terms of water quality issues, what happens with out on the river, and so this identified a major gap, and it helped us initiate one of the province's longest running and most extensive water quality monitoring programs that we have in any of the major basins right now. We've got working with municipal partners and Alberta government, we've got about 10 sites on the main stem, as well as at different times we've done 6 or 8 years worth of data on some of the major tributaries to have a better baseline. But the one thing I wanted to point out, I'm doing it again. The one thing I wanted to point out is, that's a snapshot of all the mapping that was done in that first State of the Watershed report, and you can see it just cut everything off at the Alberta border. And so we recognized honestly, right after it was basically completed, that first project, that we did a pretty good job of understanding what the baseline conditions were in the Alberta portion of the watershed, but again, I mentioned we're attached to the head and the hip. We are so, whether it's wildlife or water issues, they don't stop at the border. And we can't, and some of these large tracts of intact native grassland that we have right along the border here in the Alberta portion of the watershed, just south of the line, we heard a little bit about Kennedy Coulee and some of those areas yesterday. Well, it's like thousands of acres of cultivation right there on the other side of the border. So you don't manage, just like I think Diego was talking about some of the research there, we're in Saskatchewan, we're not in a petri dish. You can't, you have to recognize the interconnectedness, and that's what we were missing from 2008. And so back in 2012, we said, okay, well, let's get the band back together. We had this group that developed that 2008 report from Alberta, and so we had identified the folks like Brad Downey, the wildlife biologists, the fisheries guys, the groundwater specialists, the range management specialists in Alberta, and right at the same time, there was lots of discussion. That was before the Transboundary Grasslands group was together, but we had discussions with some of our partners, and we're learning who those partners were in different jurisdictions with our work with the Watershed Council, and we said, let's try doing this transboundary. Let's use that Alberta core team and find their their colleagues in these other jurisdictions that are working on similar issues or have availability of those major data sets that we're looking to try to harmonize this kind of stuff and see if we can do this on a bigger scale. So 2013, we came up with the first Transboundary report. This is a really cool shot. This is on the back cover of that 2013 report. I had a couple of senior board members that bounced along the border for about an hour and a half before they finally got to the spot where they could get this shot. This was actually, this is the crossing. This is the medicine line. This is the corner fence post basically for the border between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and I think the shot was taken just standing on the Montana side. So again, I think that I like that it was on the back cover of our report because it kind of bookended and told us, yeah, this is what we're dealing with. Things don't observe international boundaries, and we need to recognize management on both sides. So yeah, why transboundary? The resources are not static. Water flows, border wildlife migrates, plants disperse. We wanted to really create that level of cooperation with our other watershed partners, and develop that greater understanding of our shared resources and build on previous work, whether it was field trips or tours and things that we've done with partners in Saskatchewan and Montana, as well as some of the international work that's happened for over 100 years with the Boundary Waters Treaty and the International Joint Commission. You probably can't read all that, but that's just gives you an indication. We had, I believe, someone's going to correct me, I think it was like about 50 individuals that just contributed content alone, and agencies, of course, that had this on the corner of their desk to actually basically summarize all the work that they had been doing within their departments in order to put together these reports. And we did in 2013. This is obviously pre-COVID. This is just before everybody was doing everything on Teams and Zoom or whatever. So I did a number of road trips down to Malta and Havre and Glasgow and Swift Current and everything to meet with individuals and kind of give them our vision and be able to pull it together. And it worked. It worked pretty good. There was challenges. Again, harmonizing data sets. We had drainages and creeks that when you put the GIS data sets together, they didn't match at the border, or other challenges with just the language, the terminology, especially when you're getting into hydrology and bedrock geology and soils and everything. Everybody in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Montana were doing things differently. So there was major barriers, and then just figuring out how the heck we're going to report in units, feet, and meters, protected area status. So if you're trying to develop a protected area map, then how do you classify some of these other things? And then species at risk reporting, of course. We don't have the exact same standards and how we classify and deal with species risk. Some of the, for instance, fisheries, some of the minnow species that our Little Fish Big Stewardship Program is dealing with here in Alberta that you learned about from Marnell this morning. They kind of laugh because they got bait stations where they're literally the preferred ones that you can use. You can catch your own minnow traps and above Fresno Reservoir and use them for bait, because they'd rather use the indigenous minnow species for a live bait versus bringing in an invasive species from otherwhere. So and same thing, we had wildlife biologists that were talking about our limitations and challenges with sage grouse in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and the biologists over there from Montana Fish and Wildlife Parks are like, well, we still got a season right here, 5 miles south of where your critical area is. So maybe we need to think about this more collaboratively. But it was one of the things I think, like I mentioned, lightning in the bottle. We really found an opportunity to be able to bridge scientific and technical community with people who live in the watershed. So this approach has been able to allow us to, like I said, to reach a broader audience. Like I said, there's every school and libraries. You go into Writing on Stone or even the Yummy's restaurant here in town, and they've got a copy of the SAL report sitting out on the table for people to flip through and kind of learn. And I think that's been really good. We kind of followed a general headlines for all the reporting, looking at watershed characteristics, socioeconomic condition, surface water quality and quantity allocation, groundwater, biodiversity, land use, of course, which catches a whole gamut of things. And one of the emerging things that really stood out in 2013 was just how much watershed stewardship that's happening out there. Like you heard this morning about Multisar's work in southern Alberta, which is incredible. The new work since 2013 actually now is captured in 2023, but groups like the Rancher Stewardship Alliance in Montana, and of course SODCAP was 2013 was a funny time because it was right during that time in Saskatchewan when some of the PFRA pastures were transferring and there was a lot of questions. We actually that listing of folks that helped us out in 2013, there was a few somewhat disgruntled, almost former federal government employees that supported our work as almost the last thing on their desk before they were out the door when community pastures were being closed. And so stewardship was really important to capture. And it's when you start putting all those numbers together and recognizing how much of an impact all organizations have had on the landscape, working directly with producers and municipalities and others, it's really impressive. This is just a sample, some of the sample maps. This is one of the fisheries work. We tried to not only report on information within the report, but visually try to provide it. So we did things like defining the species reaches and kind of where we knew where the data gaps were, what the conditions were. And really for the last 10 years, this first Transboundary report has been used to support a number of things, everything from education programs, our stewardship efforts with residents and landowners. It's given me a baseline even when I'm trying to apply for grant funding. And I can say, look, we want to support producer stewardship measures. And I can say, hey, I know that the North Fork of the Milk River is critical because of X, Y, Z. And this is why we're looking for this funding, and it's helped support a lot of that. And it's become a decision-making tool for not only us locally, but it's also supporting some of the provincial initiatives, and maybe more importantly lately it's supporting the federal decision makers with Water Survey of Canada and the IJC, and they've become trusted and critical partners to our Watershed Council as well. We've been working back and forth more closely. So that brings us to basically COVID 2020. We're saying, geez, we want to do a 10-year turnaround. We want to shoot for 2023 to report another State of the Watershed report and work Transboundary. And we weren't planning on starting this project until probably 2021. We wanted to give it about a 2-year leeway out so that we could coordinate our teams in each municipalities. And again, we knew that there's way more work happening in Montana and Saskatchewan and across southern Alberta than there was 10 years previous. But when the world kind of shut down in 2020 and everybody was getting more familiar with Zoom meetings and team meetings and doing all this stuff, and people were saying, shoot, I'm not on the ground doing my on-the-ground initiatives. Our field work looks awkward and weird because we're out here in masks and smaller groups and everything. We said, okay, let's bump up the timeline a little bit and see if we can start working on this thing. And so we did. I just want to try to make sure I was actually in the right spot here in my story. But so we did. We started to get that group back together that worked in 2013. We had new partners, of course, with SODCAP, and some organizations have changed in Montana. 2013, we worked quite closely with what we call our sister organization, the Milk River Watershed Alliance. They had kind of fallen back and were not as active at that time, so we started working more closely with the Milk River Joint Board of Control in Montana, as well as picking up on the work that was happening with Rancher Stewardship Alliance and others. And of course some of our important partners with DNRC and Fish and Wildlife Parks, they stepped up and provide a lot of work. I'm going to skip that one, I'm sorry. But yeah, but back to some of the key updates. that 2013 was an important background document, but we missed, we need to do some work on it. There was extensive monitoring that was added from 2012 to 2022, and in some cases 2023. We wanted to improve the coverage of information and some of the map products. We wanted to provide greater consideration for climate change, climate variability in the context of watershed resiliency. And I think this is maybe one of the more important things is we wanted to improve our representation and consideration of both traditional knowledge, especially in Montana with tribal lands, but also incorporating Western science that's held by First Nations. For instance, with the fisheries work alone, the Blackfeet tribe had been doing incredible fish work, everything from in the headwaters, doing more work in regards to bull trout and some of the sensitive larger species, but they also had fish data, and they were tracking data on a number of those tributaries that were coming off those toe slopes of the Blackfeet Reservation and into the Middle Fork, North Fork, Dry Fork of the Milk River coming across the line. And previous years we didn't, I want to say we didn't have relationships that were strong enough that we were comfortable, that those groups would be comfortable working with us and sharing with us, but also we didn't do a good enough job reaching out and ensuring that we filled those gaps. And when we were working with, in Montana's perspective, working with state or federal agencies and different groups, important pieces, important geographies of the 2013 report kind of fell through the cracks. So we wanted to make sure we did a much better job, and I feel like confident that we have gotten there with this one. Discussion of noteworthy events that happened in the last 10 years. One thing that we increased, and I'm probably jumping the gun on my slides, but we actually got some fire mapping in place here, and it's funny, in the last 10 years in our back of the woods, everybody's been concerned about fire. We've had a couple major events in the watershed on the Alberta side. But then you pull together a fire map and you look at the fire history back even to where we had data back in some cases to the 30s and 40s. There's a lot of this landscape that hasn't been touched that traditionally might have had fire return intervals identified in that 7 to 15 year range, and we know that's been largely taken off the landscape in terms of a disturbance in large areas, and you heard a little bit about some of that work yesterday too. This was actually kind of interesting. I had on here like locating, accessing data and availability sometimes was a challenge. In some cases, so in 2013, it was like I had a face-to-face conversation with one of those folks in Montana from Fish Wildlife Parks. I said, geez, Iris, I need you to take that fisheries data and try to help me summarize it to fit what our guys did here in Alberta. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. 2023, so when we're working into 2021 and 2022, our contractor who was working on the work, she would reach out to those folks and we'd have a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting with them. And they'd say, yeah, sure, I'll send you over everything. And the next thing you know, it was a huge data dump of 15 reports, all their raw data from 50 years that they hadn't actually done much summarizing with or whatever. So instead of us capturing the Reader's Digest version of all those incredible things that they were doing those ways, we all of a sudden had like data overload that we had to wade through, and it actually slowed us down. And then also working at the pace of our partners, whether they're agency folks or some of the tribal groups, Fort Belknap, for instance. We had to work through their processes to make sure that we were sensitive to how things were being shared and presented and what information that we needed. So we were a process that was supposed to take 18 months roughly. It stretched out quite a bit because we had to work at the pace of our partners. And that's the one thing on this idea of working transboundary and different agencies and individuals. It's all about this stuff. It's relationship building and making sure that we have strong understanding of where people are coming from and what their capacity is so that we're not overwhelming anyone. So you got to take your time. GIS I mentioned a little bit of some of the challenges in 2013. It was even worse in 2020 23 here because there was improved data, but there was still some things that needed to be updated. I'm almost embarrassed to say the 2013, the first Transboundary report was almost 800 hours worth of GIS work to develop all those beautiful maps and put all harmonize and work on getting things to work across all the boundaries. It was incredible. We thought, it'll be easier in 2023. We've already got the base maps. No, it was not even close. There was quite a bit of different stuff that came in, things that had changed, even little notes like the watershed boundaries. There was a little bit of all of a sudden the numbers weren't adding up in some spots because there had been things that had been slightly adjusted with better quality data. So I mentioned we did a bit of work right from the beginning. We've always looked at condition monitoring. This is tricky. Everybody monitors things differently. We talked about, there was a discussion earlier about range health scores, and we've incorporated range health scores from work in Saskatchewan, Montana, and Alberta, and we said, how the heck do we kind of do this? It's really challenging, and this is something that we need to work more closely on to try to harmonize. It doesn't matter if you're talking about water, riparian health, range health, water quality, or other issues. But we came up with a system that worked okay for us, and at least gives a bit of an indication of how confident we are with the data, how conditions are moving up or down or staying stable, or if we just simply don't have enough information, we can capture that, and we can say that this is something that we can work on in the next 10 years. So. A little bit of, I'm not expecting anybody to read all this, but you can check it out in the summary if you want. Everything, we looked at everything from surface water quality, groundwater, riparian areas and wetlands, fish, wildlife. We had certain keystone species, I want to say keystone, but certain indicator species that we'd use that we had really good data sets and that we knew we could work on. That's kind of how we kind of picked out different areas on how we'd manage that. Land use, again, I mentioned that, and the big important one, stewardship, economic opportunity, industry and employment, trying to catch those people bits. Our watershed is not any different in Alberta than it is in a lot of the north central Montana area. We've got communities that are dying. We're simply getting older and smaller, and there's less people on the landscape, and that means there's less people to steward the land as well too. And larger operations are good for one reason, but they also, if you go from having 15 families on 15 ranches in a community, you had enough that you had your 4-H club was intact, you've got enough people to run the parent-teacher council and actually have a school in the community. All of a sudden, if you get down to 6 or 8, where you had 30 before, it gets really difficult to keep these small communities together. And that's something that I think we captured that as a theme in last year's Transboundary Grasslands partnership and workshop in Shelby, and it's something that we can't lose sight of, is that we need to look at the people part of watershed management as well. The 2023 report, we had about 338 hours of additional GIS mapping, and I can't think enough. A lot of this GIS work happened from groups like the Nature Conservancy's folks. I can't thank Patrick Wensman enough from Alberta EPA in Alberta. A lot of his work went in there to update Blair's mapping from 2013. It was pretty incredible, but what we came up with was some pretty good resources. That's washed out pretty good, but it's kind of an indicator of some of the work that we're doing. The area that we're heading out to west of town here is largely intact this afternoon up on the Milk River Ridge. It's going to be really interesting. So if anybody wants to take a peek at one of the maps before we go, I can show off some of the areas. But really, this is a good example. Water quality monitoring. I talked about how extensive the Alberta portion of our water quality monitoring work was, and it is great for Alberta. But look what's happening in Montana. It's awesome, and a number of those groups, like the Fort Belknap Tribal College, has a water center now, and they're actually using our data sets and our state of the watershed reports as a teaching tool within the school, and they're collecting their own data, matching the same protocols and things that are happening on our side. So this is report has moved beyond just saying, here's something great for someone who wants to do research in the area, or here's something great for community members that want to kind of see how the state of everything are in the area and look at the beautiful pictures and maps. But it's also being actively used, which is really what we were shooting for. Wildfire history, yeah. This is that one I was mentioning before, like, there it is. This large fire that was west of us here was pretty scary back in 2012 or 2013. I'm not sure where it is on here. And we think about, wow, there's been a lot of fires in our part of the watershed for the last few years, but there's a lot of that landscape that hasn't, and that's something that I think we need to take into consideration. Until you put it together on a scale like this, it's hard to see that. So there is a summary document up back there of it. I really do think that this report has kind of identified a lot of additional work that needs to be done, which is great. I'm going to skip through the recommendations, actually. Get right to the end here. But I think one of the major themes that comes through here is that we need to continue to work more collaboratively and cooperatively. And events like this and organizations like this, where we can pull together agency folks as well with producers, researchers, science, is really important. And I think this is just the first of transboundary initiatives in terms of like these major reporting like initiatives like this, and they can be nested, they can work at different scales, and I know there are in some ways. But it's really important for folks like you that are in the room here to make sure that we don't lose sight of how we're connected, whether we're in the range end of things or wildlife or water quality. It's really important for us to do that. I'm gonna hover over the energy sector one because you're gonna see a couple of gravel pits on our way out this afternoon for the folks that are coming with us, and an area that has become more of a challenge, I'll say, with our watershed here the last couple of years has been aggregate mining, and we've seen, and we need it. We need products. We need aggregate for construction and for everything else. Our province, Alberta, needs to do a better job of staying on top of small aggregate operations in the area. There's a particular ranch out west of here had a sign that said land and cattle for a couple decades, and then sold out to another family who they took down the land and cattle sign, and it was their family name, Sand and Gravel. And a lot of the reasons why they were able to purchase that property was not because they were running cows on it, it's because of the value of the aggregate underneath them. And then now some of that has actually been turned to another family who doesn't have the same value model on some of these grassland areas, and some of that stuff has been, a significant portion of that's been turned under the plow again here recently on soils that are not really, there's a reason why there's gravel underneath, valuable gravel underneath, is that they're pretty thin soils up top. So this is kind of stuff that we need to be aware of, and it's going to be emerging issues everywhere, but in particular our watershed. I mentioned community and stewardship. It's really incredible the amount of how things have taken off in the last decade plus, I guess, but with organizations that are sprung up, and we need to continue to support everybody, and we need partners like the federal governments and others to continue to recognize the value of those stewardship efforts. And I think we need to do a better job of telling our positive good news stories in to the larger audience as well. Future transboundary efforts increase resource and data sharing to reduce redundancies, again, where things overlap. Utilizing watersheds as the basis for data collection and analysis at all scales. Improving the timeliness of reporting. I'm not going to pick on particular provincial government agencies, but like there are some things where we some of the reporting timelines get lapsed, and makes it difficult if you're a municipal partner or other watershed group or others that are trying to do things on the ground if we got challenges there. So we need to try to be accountable across the board. Improve data management that promotes sharing, accessibility, and maintenance of long-term records. In a couple of the reports here, there was back in 1914, there was actually a riparian survey conducted of the entire Milk River from the North Fork of the Milk River through to the eastern crossing on the Alberta side. There's hand-drawn, large scrolls of hand-drawn profiles of the river with plant lists and indication of riparian plant communities, cottonwood banding, and important observations. This report sat with the PFRA for decades and decades and was actually lost when PFRA shut down. That's a Prairie Farm, for the folks in Montana, Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Agency, Association, Administration, pardon me, federal agency that was around for almost 100 years and then closed up shop, actually under the Harper government. This report was lost. And one retired PFRA guy had a big chunk of it that was photocopied off, and he had it underneath a bed in a spare bedroom or something. And he asked the Watershed Council if you guys want it. And we're like, yeah, we do. And that's now been digitized. We actually had a contractor that used it for sedimentation and erosion study work that was done along the river here a while ago, and looked at different, the channel migration and erosion rates based on different flow rates and where we're moving in the future. And we have to be very careful in this digital age even. I had a computer crash on me, a week and a half ago now. I feel like I've lost part of my existence. And I had a lot of stuff that backed up on the OneDrive, but I know that there's files that are corrupted and they're long gone. And we're in such a digital world now, we have to be very careful whether we have all these old paper records or we have digital files. We have to do a better job and make sure we don't lose that. And I think initiatives like this can help us make sure that we don't lose that and we have continuity. And again, continuing, I think this is one of the more important things, that continuing on the path of reconciliation with First Nations, creating opportunities to learn more about Indigenous knowledge and inform watershed conditions, assessment and management. We're gracious enough to get our foot in the door. I shouldn't say that. To start with a path of being involved with our Indigenous communities across the entire greater watershed. We got to continue to foster those relationships and do a better job, and that's it. Yeah, so where is it? There is the full digital version is on our website if anybody wants to download it. One of the really cool things that came out of this, in 2013, we basically shared the GIS mapping, which is fantastic. There's high resolution PDF versions of all that stuff, all publicly available. This time around, we made sure that we had clear data sharing agreements on a lot of our stuff, and we basically beefed up a major GIS package that our Watershed Council has available for that entire transboundary area. A lot of the data sets that were used in terms of incorporating this stuff is all available now, and if people can talk to us directly, the research community and others can make requests, and our municipal partners, and we're able to share a lot more of that stuff more freely this time, which is, instead of me just, here's a PDF of it, that's it, and you can try to search the citation to find the data sets yourself. We can help make that connection, and it might actually. Recently, we had a strategic planning session with our Watershed Council. We really are looking at developing a bit of a science hub where we can help facilitate researchers who want to come down, both through our producer network for access, but also doing things like providing GIS and potentially even lab space for different projects and things across here. And that's really super cool and exciting. We do have print versions available there. I can probably be convinced to let a few of those go for free for folks that want one, but we also are asking for donations. And there is a 12-page summary that's available back there as well. So yeah, I can't, this project wouldn't have been possible without everybody that we had contributing. Sandy Ramirez from Palliser Environmental Services has been kind of our rock for some of these major projects over the years. Liz Saunders, I think this ended up being one of her last major projects. If you're familiar with Liz, did a lot of the multi-SAR and cows and fish illustrations and work over the years. And I think we gave her a few extra gray hairs, I think, with this big project and the way it came in for her to do it. But and then again, all the contributors. There's a number of you in the room here that helped facilitate this sucker, and many more as well. So thank you once again. Thanks to everybody, and hopefully, like I said, I'm in the crying spot. So hopefully everybody enjoyed the conference, and for those that are joining us this afternoon, it'll be great. So thank you.